I'm a Trading Standards Officer with Buckinghamshire and Surrey Trading Standards. With us today we have Marie Biswell, who will be providing British Sign Language interpretation throughout, and Bernadette Laurie from Surrey and Sussex Police, who will be covering advice on romance fraud. So I'll pass over to Bernadette first. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So my name is Bernadette Laurie and I'm the Financial Abuse Safeguarding Officer for Sussex and Surrey. And we're going to start by talking about romance fraud, which always topical at this time of year as we approach Valentine's Day. Just to start with a bit of perspective on the levels that we're seeing across Sussex and Surrey, so across both force areas. Romance fraud levels really peaked during 2021 as a result of the COVID pandemic. This meant that when everybody was locked down and unable to meet people face to face, online dating in general soared, as did romance fraud. And this gave a lot of legitimacy for fraudsters sort of making their reasons for not travelling and coming to the UK and the like. So we saw a real peak at that. And then in 2022, whilst it did drop, it stayed higher than pre-pandemic levels. So it dropped back, but higher still. And what we've seen now is between 2022 and 2023, we've seen a 14.5% rise year on year, which is absolutely huge compared to other crime types that we see. So it is really a growing fraud type. And just to give you a little bit of understanding of who the victims are, because I think there may be some misconceptions as to who are the victims of romance fraud. And this is partly because we have a slight difference in who are the victims and who are the people that report that they've been a victim of romance fraud. And sadly, that's because a lot of people feel embarrassed and ashamed and don't want to report the crime. So we rely a lot on other people reporting on behalf of victims. So family members, other agencies, banks, building societies, people that are spotting those signs on behalf of the victims. So in fact, what we see, contrary to, as I say, perhaps popular belief, we see a fairly equal split. In fact, if anything, a tiny bit more male victims than female. But the male victims are often less likely to come forward willingly of their own accord. We see victims of all age ranges and crossing all sexualities as well. So victims are more likely to be over 50, but we do see victims in their 20s, 30s, 40s, but 73% of our victims are over 50 and with an average age of 59. And a high percentage of our victims live alone. So that's not a massive surprise that 63% of our victims live on their own. That obviously does contribute to the vulnerability because of the loneliness and the isolation. But it's also quite interesting to see 37% don't live on their own, and quite a lot of them are actually actively in a relationship themselves whilst also being defrauded by a romance fraudster. So if we just stick with the victim profile for a minute and just talk about the losses that we've seen, because the losses to romance fraud are quite staggering and they really are a huge part of the impact. So 6.65 million just in the 1 year across both force areas in Sussex and Surrey. And that equates to 16,500 loss per victim where a loss was recorded. So you can see this is a hugely impactful element of the fraud, with the top payment methods being bank transfer, gift cards, including Amazon and Apple vouchers, bank card, PayPal, and money service bureaus such as Western Union and MoneyGram. And 89% of dating and romance fraud victims are initially contacted online somehow. So that's either on a dating site or a dating app, or perhaps through social media such as Facebook or by email. So in fact, only 11% of our victims are targeted in the first instance, either by telephone or in person. We do, of course, see in-person frauds, but as you see from the data, they are less prevalent. So we've talked about the financial impact, but in fact, one of the real priorities for us is actually the emotional impact, and it has such far-reaching consequences. And sadly, we do see people with a huge impact on their mental health and their physical health and well-being, and sadly, in some cases, people even contemplating suicide. So what kind of MOs, if you like, what do we see people doing? So one of the ones that I just wanted to raise at the moment, which we've seen a lot more of recently, is the celebrity scams. And I think that's something that we never used to see, because in the old days you couldn't really get close to a celebrity, whereas now it's completely possible to follow a celebrity on Twitter or X and be part of a group. So you can be a bit more in touch with a celebrity, but of course that's given more fuel for the fraudsters. And examples that we've seen locally: Tom Cruise, Keanu Reeves, Hugh Jackman, Shane from Westlife, Emma Watson, the Harry Potter actress, and Julio Iglesias, but the list is not exhaustive. We see a huge amount. And one of the things just there at the top is sometimes on those fan pages, the celebrities themselves have been made aware that people are impersonating them. So they're trying to sort of raise that profile themselves as well, to warn people of the imposters trying to impersonate them. And we also see, we've also seen an increase in the use of AI and artificial intelligence, and that's particularly around the video call. So when a fraudster is trying to make contact, and perhaps the victim isn't satisfied with endless excuses as to why they can't meet them in person and why they can't speak on FaceTime. So these deepfake videos are becoming much more accessible and widely used by the fraudsters. So there's a couple of things that we can do about this, and one of them is we work with a company called Scamalytics, and Scamalytics work with all the dating sites to automatically remove scammers that are registered on their sites. So what that means is, if you go onto a website, onto a dating site or a dating app, and you believe that somebody that you're communicating with is a fraudster, there's normally a mechanism with that actual site where you can report to them, and they have their own mechanisms for checking the profiles and taking them down. But of course, the problem with that is that that will just remove one profile from one site, whereas we know the fraudsters operate over multiple sites using different images, different profile names, potentially using a multitude of different email addresses to create those profiles. And what this does through Scamalytics is it works across all those sites. So it's estimated that if we submit one form, we can take down up to 50 profiles. So it's something that we as law enforcement do, and our caseworkers will do, but it's also something that members of the public can do. And victims can often feel quite empowered when they're doing something like that, because what it does is it prevents other people falling victim to the same profile or the same scammer. So it's something that we would actively encourage, and that's available on our external websites should anyone need that. So just back a little bit about the reporting. So in Sussex and Surrey, we took quite a bold move across law enforcement to really encourage people to report on behalf of victims, and to have those interventions with romance fraud victims that perhaps wouldn't come forward themselves. And what happened was, it actually sort of, as you can imagine, sometimes things got portrayed in the press and the media, saying it's a hotspot, it's the dating capital, and that's because we saw the rates rise. But we saw the rates rise because we had those positive, proactive interventions with the individuals that perhaps perhaps wouldn't have self-reported or come forward and perhaps weren't ready to recognise themselves as being in a fraudulent relationship. So in fact, that data is actually really encouraging to see that people are raising that profile and increasing that reporting so that we can see how much of this fraud is going on. And then just a little bit, obviously we say most of our fraudsters operate online. That doesn't mean we can't catch them. We have had some successful prosecutions, particularly in Surrey, where we've had people, either real life fraudsters that have moved in with their victims, or online fraudsters that have been operating in criminal gangs and networks. And we've seen, we don't catch them all, but when we do, obviously it's good to send a warning out that we are proactively working in that space. So when we visit victims to safeguard them, obviously one of the things that we need to do is break that spell, because often victims will not recognise that the relationship they're in isn't genuine. And so we spend a lot of our time dealing with that aspect of things and trying to convince people that they're not alone and that this is actually a very common crime type. And whilst each individual circumstances is different, there's some very similar tactics that the fraudsters are using and very similar emotions that victims are experiencing. And what we found that is it's quite a lengthy, difficult intervention that's required with victims that have been, because they've been groomed over a lengthy period of time, and they've had their trust shattered, and along with that they've lost a lot of self-confidence and sadly sometimes lost contact with their own friends and family as a result of it. So our victim support caseworkers have introduced a peer support group, and what that does is it allows victims to talk about their experience with other people that have been through something similar, and we found that a really valuable sort of option at the end of the victim's journey, so they can really have that sense that they're not alone and that other people have experienced similar things, and it helps to rebuild their confidence and just move forward, having been impacted so much as a result of the fraud. So that's something that is available across Surrey and Sussex through our victim support caseworkers, and that's conducted on an online platform. And then I suppose the most important bit of this session really is just to talk about how we can stay safe, particularly online from fraudsters, because there's so much of it about. And generally what we find is when people engage in online dating, often it's the first time they're a little bit unaware of how things work, and they get love bombed, if you like. So very quickly, the fraudster will become quite intense and the relationship will develop at a speed that's perhaps a little bit unnatural. And that's why we call it love bombing. It's sort of, it can escalate very, very quickly, and people are sort of saying they've met their soulmate, they're in love with somebody within a very, very short space of time, or a very unnaturally short space of time. And this can often be at the exclusion of those people that are around them, so they isolate them a little bit from their friends and family, and encourage that sort of one-to-one contact. So we see that happening, and that's how it sort of develops very quickly. And then we've got a long-term sort of grooming process where they're kind of sowing the seeds for the narrative that they're going to use as the reason that they're then ultimately going to need some money. So just paving the way for those stories to become more legitimate and more believable. Sadly, what we often see and is that the fraudster will very, very quickly try and get that victim off that dating platform. So they're engaging in a other communication method, which means that if the dating site do uncover that this person's a fraudster and then do remove them from the site, unfortunately, the victim may already be in such close contact with them off that safe dating platform that they're unaware now that they've been flagged up as a fraudster and removed from the site because they're already engaged with them. So so some of our real top tips that we would say is really, obviously, don't rush into an online relationship. Get to know the person, not the profile. People can be anybody they want to be. They can use whatever images, they can use whatever narrative, and they will often grab in on some similarities and make it seem like you've got something in common, and just really exploit that element of it. So there is such a thing as reverse image searching, where we can check whether the image has been used somewhere else or is online somewhere else. And we've often seen that where an image is actually belongs to perhaps a model or a front face, you know, a sort of quite overt celebrity, or just somebody with an open profile online. So there's just some accessible images and things. My most important message that I always say to people is talk to your friends and family. Don't keep this secret. The fraudster will want you to keep it secret. The fraudster will want to isolate you from your friends and family because they're the ones that care about you, and they're the ones that will be looking out for you. So there's a real sense if they try to remove you from that. Especially when you're talking about money, and it's one thing that we often see victims discuss at the once they've come out of this this fraud. They say, I wish I'd spoken to my family sooner. You know, they were asking questions about the finances, about the money. I should have opened up and told them, and they would have been able to help and support. So that's probably, and also to look out for your friends and family. So if you know somebody that's just entering into a new relationship and you think it's moving perhaps a bit quickly and there's something that just doesn't seem quite right, really try and have those interventions early on. It sounds obvious, but never send money or share your bank details with someone that you don't really know and you've just met online. If you've only met them online, they could still be anybody. And we often see people, they scan in their passports, they share information, and sometimes their bank accounts will then be used by the fraudsters for money laundering and other criminal purposes. So they really are at the mercy of the criminals. And I've already said it, stay on that safe dating messenger service, because that's got the rules and the mechanisms in place to try and keep you safe. Once you're off that platform, there's no checks and measures to keep that secure. So unfortunately, we do see it a lot, and that is one of the sort of quickest things the fraudsters will do is get you straight off that platform. But for as long as you can, stay on that communication platform or keep checking back. We would really recommend that. I know we're going to take questions at the end, so I will move back now and stop sharing my screen. Back over to you, Linda.
Lovely. Thanks ever so much, Bernie. That was really interesting. So I will share my screen now.
Did you click the audio?
No, I didn't, Natalie. Thank you. Share audio. There we go. Lovely. Can everybody see that?
You might have to come back out of it because I think it will only do it. You have to click it before you share it. The audio thing. So you might have to stop sharing, click the audio, and then share.
No, the audio doesn't come up before the share button there.
Oh, strange. Well, just see how it goes. If the videos don't have sound, then we'll just skip over them.
Yeah, that's fine. Can you see my screen?
No, you come
no.
up. Sorry, I've mucked you up now.
Talk amongst yourselves, people. Seamless.
There we
It's
go.
seamless.
We'll see it now.
Okay, brilliant. Good morning again. And thanks to Bernie. That was really interesting. So yeah, I'm Linda. I'm a Trading Standards Officer with Bucks and Surrey Trading Standards, and I want to talk to you today about the other types of scams that Bernie's not talked about. So we're going to learn what a scam is and who's targeted by them. And I think we probably all know that we all are. And I'm sure there's not anybody on this call who's not had a phone call or a text message or something which is identified as a scam, because, as Bernie said, they're absolutely rife. So anyone can be affected by a scam. It could be all sorts of reasons that can make us in a vulnerable circumstance, as it were. It's not just age. It's not just that people are lonely. It's a contribution, a few factors that lean into it. So it could be that someone's recently bereaved, or recently divorced, in the case certainly of the romance, but all those things that can make us at a vulnerable time in our lives. So to get people hooked and responding to scams, criminals rely on a few things. So as Bernie said, I think one of the key factors really in trying to disrupt any of this is that we shouldn't feel ashamed if we have responded, and we should talk to anybody that will listen, really, because the only way that perhaps we can get round this is for us to all openly discuss the scam that we've come across, the scam that we may or may not have responded to, and scammers are criminals, quite often organised criminal groups, who will use all these factors to then try and hook somebody to respond to a scam. So there's this cycle. You respond to a scam, you lose money, your personal details are then added. So this is more perhaps in very common situations in response to mail scams. So, the letter scams that you get through the door. And we'll pick up on that a bit later as to what might be a way to get round that. But one of the things is that you are put on what they term, and it's a horrible term, but suckers list. So it's a scam target list, and they call it, the fact that they call it that, the fraudsters, is indicative of the sort of people that you're dealing with. They have no respect for the people that they're defrauding. They target the individual. They then get more scams, they respond, etc. And so it's a cycle that goes round. And what we have to think about is ways that we can disrupt that cycle to stop it happening. When we Trading Standards first got involved in this sphere of sort of fraudulent trading, as it were, or fraud scams, was in respect of some information that we got through from the National Trading Standards Scams team, where they'd picked up on some of these lists. And so we became aware of people that may have been responding to mail in the first instance until it was opened up a bit wider. And I visited a lady in Tandridge, and I visited with a PCSO and we'd both heard that this lady was responding to large amounts of scam mail. And we spoke to her for quite a while, and her dining room table was set out with her checkbook and all the letters that she'd received that day. And she responded to each one and sent off the cheque that they were asking for. And it might have been in respect of catalogue goods or a clairvoyant scam, or all sorts of different scams that were asking for money. And it may have been, the common ones were the so-called Australian lottery, for example, where in order to claim your prize, you had to send off money. And she was sending cheques off. And so each time she got more and more of this mail coming her way. And when the PCSO and I left, we intercepted, coincidentally, the postman who was delivering, and she had 30 letters, all scam mail, coming to her door on that day. And if you average that at that time, the cost of responding to each scam was probably 30 or 40 quid per letter on average. So that's 30 times at least 30. That's £900 a day she was sending off every day that the postman came, which in those days was every day. So huge amounts of money she was losing. And it became several visits for us to try and get that cycle to be broken. And we'll come back to her in a couple of slides' time. So the consequences of falling for scams, as Bernie said, can be extremely damaging. And people that are defrauded are 2.5 times more likely to end up in care if they're in the older age group. It leads to damaged relationships, as Bernie said, or mental, physical health, and people do attempt or take their own life. So these are some of the reasons that people have told us they respond to the scam mail. You know, it's not for them. It's not really generally about them wanting to win it for themselves. It's more about them wanting to either have a relationship with somebody, even if it's, you know, by post, because they are lonely, or they want to improve their family's life, you know, their children's lives, because they're convinced they're going to win that money. So going back to the lady in Tandridge, one of the schemes that we had is a scam marshal scheme. So this lady was in her 80s at the time, and she'd had a very good job in London when she worked. She was retired now, but she was very sort of cut off. And so she saw this responding to the mail as a sort of job, really, and it gave her a sense of purpose. So what we needed to do was to try and change that a bit, so that she had a sense of purpose again, but wasn't losing money in the process. So I spoke to her about becoming a scam marshal for us, which is effectively a sort of volunteer for us, where we get the intelligence from the post that she was receiving. And we've now widened it over to all sorts of different scams. And it's all about talking to family and friends about what they're doing as a scam marshal. So it's bigging them up, but they also send off the mail that they get receiving with the envelope, which holds the details of who has delivered it, where it's come from, which is good intelligence for the national team and obviously any other enforcement agencies. And it enables us to look at prosecuting and closing down criminal activity. And as I say, it gives them a sense of worth. So a few years later, after I'd spent some time with her and she was difficult to immediately change her pattern of behaviour because she'd been doing it for a long time. So I went to go and visit her again 2 or 3 years later, thinking, oh no, because her name came up again, thinking, oh, please don't let her still be responding. And I'd forgotten that I'd said to her about being at the time, it was called a mail marshal for us. And when I visited, she was a different woman. She was, no, don't you remember? I'm a volunteer for you. I do this. And coincidentally again, but true, I left that morning. Her dining room table didn't have that mail all set up with all the stamps and everything on that occasion. And when I left, the postman delivered one parcel, which was legitimate. So because she had stopped responding, that cycle had reversed. She got less and less mail, and as a result was safer at home. She also had obviously a sense of purpose. And from also being a scam marshal, once you've done it for a while, you also get post from the National Trading Standards Scams team with newsletters and information, and you also can be put in touch with other people who've had the same experience so that you can openly talk about it. So that's worked really well. And if you know of anyone that might be getting any scam mail or is interested in becoming a scam marshal, let us know. So telephone scams. Hopefully this is going to work, thanks to Natalie's timely reminder about the audio. And I'm sure we've all heard this one.
Have to press 1 to get connected to the officer of HMRC. If in case you don't press 1 and your call is not connected to us, then the warrant will be issued under your name straight away and you will get arrested shortly.
I don't know about you, but I've certainly had that phone call twice where I'm going to be arrested. And obviously that is work by the fraudsters to try and create fear so that you respond quickly, so that you don't have that conversation with your family and friends to establish whether it is legitimate or not. And we all need that sounding board, don't we, of talking to somebody to get a sense of balance sometimes. So if in doubt, don't respond, and think about it before you do. And all of those type phone calls, they're never going to be the HMRC. They never ever contact you by phone.
Have to press 1 to get
sorry,
connected.
I'm going again. Call blocking. So one of the things that we've done over recent years is that we have purchased some of these TrueCall blockers to block scam calls. And if you want more details about how that works, I can go into a bit more detail at the end when we have the questions. But essentially, it plugs into a landline. We only have them for landlines, I'm afraid, at the moment. TrueCall are a private company, so you can buy SIMs for mobiles if you feel that you or someone you know is at risk from calls via your mobile. But at the moment, we can provide them free for landlines for people who are getting a lot of phone calls over their landline. And I think certainly through the start of the pandemic, it switched from our personal feelings are that the mail actually reduced and the telephone calls increased hugely, because most of us were stuck at home. A lot more people were isolated because of the pandemic, and so scammers were having a wonderful time ringing everybody at home who was isolated and in some cases quite sort of low and lonely. So it becomes part of the phone. Essentially, you feed in the telephone numbers that you want to come straight through. They come straight through, don't notice any difference. But if they're not on your preferred caller list, they will get a message, and generally that will deter any calls. And because most calls are computer generated, they don't have anybody sort of sitting there with a finger to press a button, which is what they will need to do to get through. But it doesn't then stop people like, I don't know, doctors, medical centres who are trying to get hold of you, who may not use the same number all the time to get through. So as I say, they are available and free if you feel that you know anybody that might be at risk of that. Text scams, we've all seen these as well, I'm sure. And sometimes they're quite difficult to actually pick out whether they're genuine or not. Certainly, I've had several from every or another delivery company where I should click on a link to get my parcel that's locked up somewhere. And of course, no links should be clicked on unless you're 100% sure that you know who it is, and that it's a genuine reason. So you can also hover over the top of any URLs to see if that marries up with the message within. And if you get any spam texts, we would ask that you forward it to 7726, which spells spam on your number keyboard. And it's really helpful, actually. I meant to bring down, I did this over the weekend for a text that I had, and I got a really helpful message back indicating the millions of text scams which had been forwarded to them. So really helpful for the crime units to look at that. Fake emails. So again, you can report those to this address here, report@phishing.gov.uk. And again, you know, they're rife. So you need to be very wary. Sometimes there's a dot in the wrong place or a letter that might be wrong, and that will give you a clue as to the fact that it isn't a genuine business that they're purporting to be. So in this case, TalkTalk, which is quite common. And, you know, there have also been lots of emails relating to energy where the government talk about, you know, energy schemes. That brings all the fraudsters out of the woodwork there as well. So you need to look into the background of anything in the same way as Bernie was saying about the romance fraudsters not relying on what is on there on the face of it, the profile. Also with this, you need to do a few background checks to check whether it's likely that it could be that person. Find the number for the genuine TalkTalk, for example, and or the genuine email, and then respond to just double check if you're in any way uncertain. But report it is the key, because if we don't report these things, then obviously enforcement agencies are never going to know. Fake websites. This is the NHS coronavirus vaccination one, which was obviously during the pandemic also rife, and there's a whole load of them out there as well. So again, same thing applies. Do your research, don't click on anything. Here we have the joys of, I'm not sure whether it's Facebook or Instagram, but this is a short video which was made by Barclays to indicate a point. I'll let it speak for itself.
What day is it?
It's my birthday.
It's good to share. But check you have the right privacy settings. Or someone can make a lot of money from being you.
Yeah, so, you know, we need to be sort of careful about what we put out there in the world, because people can scammers can pick bits and pieces up to get a whole complete picture of who you are, your address, your date of birth, any of those things. And one of the things that I get a lot on my Facebook pages, and I'm probably quite old-fashioned using Facebook, aren't I? But are those, you know, those quizzes where they say, oh, give us your favourite pet, you know, what was the last thing you wore and your pet's name, you know, some of these weird and wonderful quizzes. And if you respond to them, again, that's information that may be your password name, for example. So they will pick and choose the bits of information that you're passing on and put it together to possibly defraud you. So again, my advice with any of those online quizzes where they're asking for even remotely personal information is don't go there.
What day is it?
So top tips, again, as Bernie alluded to, and as I've said earlier, Take 5 to Stop Fraud is an initiative that was started by the finance houses, and you'll see in lots of banks and building societies. Basically, don't feel intimidated to tell somebody personal information. And it's so easy, isn't it? Because we can all be put into a sort of panic situation. Scammers do it to make us respond immediately, so that we don't have time to think about it or run it past anybody. And so we end up clicking that button or giving that information. It's only as soon as we've done it, we perhaps might realise that we've given away something that we shouldn't have done. So it's all about taking time, staying in control, not feeling panicked to respond immediately, either at the door when someone comes knocking at your door to give you some work on your roof or your drive or whatever, or on the telephone, through a letter, text, email, all those things. Don't be rushed. And again, if you have friends or family who may have responded to something like that and they have given away some information, then it's really important to contact your bank or their bank as soon as you can to stop a payment or try and recover the money back. There are codes of practice which some banks have signed up to, the contingency model. And so certainly if it's what they call an authorised push payment, where you've been led to believe that the person on the end of a phone or a text is somebody genuine, and you've authorised the payment on the back of that lie, then you should, certainly with a bank that has signed up to that, be able to get that money back, unless you have not, you know, there is a good reason why not. They should refund you. But you need to contact them as soon as you can. And for us, you can contact us, the Trading Standards, via the Citizens Advice Consumer Helpline. And I'll give you numbers at the end of this for that. If you contact us via that means, then if you would like us to, we'll come and visit you. And obviously other elements of fraud and whatever, we work with the police as well, obviously. So here's another video. This is my colleague David Bullen talking about a doorstep crime incident that happened probably 3 or 4 years ago now. But it's taken, obviously, it takes some while to get to court, and I think it went to court probably a couple of years ago again now. But it's about a couple who were in their 80s, and they had a knock at the door. No, actually, I lie. They had a phone call for some work to be done on their property. He was a retired architect, and he wanted some work done. And I'll leave David to explain some of the rest of it.
Tom appeared and said, "Don't panic. We've had a disaster." I was in shock. I just couldn't believe the wall between the living room and the hall could just crumble.
It was the worst example I'd seen in my sort of 15 plus years of Trading Standards. It looked like a bomb had gone off in the living room. The wall was just completely destroyed. There was dirt, rubble, dust covering the entire living room, bits of broken brick. The ceiling was sort of propped up with aqua props. Well, it didn't even look like a building site. It looked like someone had gone in there and just destroyed the living room and just completely massacred the wall. They were at the house for a few hours, and they returned home. They walked into the house, and the first thing they would have seen is the wall between the living room and the hallway had been destroyed. That was the catalyst from the price going from what was originally probably a fair price to a completely and utterly astronomical, unreasonable figure for additional work, most of which was in no way required. I think looking at the gravity and the seriousness of this case, the only fair outcome was ever going to be a custodial sentence. And I hope it also sends a clear message to any other people that might be tempted to perpetrate similar crimes, and also that, you know, trading standards in Buckinghamshire and Surrey will investigate these matters and will bring these cases to prosecution. There were other pressing needs within the property. We realised that they didn't have running hot water upstairs, so we made initial attempts to get basic amenities provided, and then we worked with adult social care to ensure that they were safeguarded moving forwards, and actually then we worked to help them identify reputable traders who could be brought in to actually complete the original plans they had.
We would like to thank all involved from saving us from ourselves. Trading Standards' enthusiasm for their profession and dedication to their work showed no limits.
Yeah, so that was one of the worst doorstep crime cases we'd seen. And, you know, they'd just gone out to a hospital appointment and came back to that. So quite devastating for them. So on the back of the work that we've done with regard to doorstep crime cases like that, we'd produced these stock called coaling sticker packs a few years ago now. So if anybody wants any of those, it contains a sticker within it to put on your front door that you don't deal with uninvited traders. As it says there, please leave and do not return. Failure to do so is a criminal offence. So it's not a criminal offence to knock on the door for them to try and elicit work from you, but it is a criminal offence if you ask them to leave and they don't go. And that's so that's why that is there. And I was a bit skeptical about this at the beginning, I'll be honest with you, because as we know, you know, criminals don't really kowtow to polite notices or indeed a lot of other things. But we found that actually it did reduce the calls that they people had, and more importantly, I think it made people feel empowered. So they could say on their doorstep, no, I don't deal with cold callers. Did you not see my notice? So, you know, answer to that, either don't answer the door, which would probably be advice number one, if it's not somebody you know, and you can look through the spy hole or whatever to make sure. But certainly our advice is definitely do not ever deal with anybody that cold calls on your door in that way, because in our experience, no good ever comes from that. And we have the scam packs as well, which has got some information in about scams generally, some contact advice, and a check sticker thing to put on your checkbook. I know checkbooks are a bit old-fashioned now, but because scammers are quite happy to take your bank details on your card, they're not fussy. And also the take 5 hands there as well, to just remind yourself, to just keep it in your mind that you need to be careful about who you're engaging with. So how to report it? As mentioned earlier, you can report it to the Citizens Advice Consumer Service. That's different from the bureaus that some of us have in our towns. So this is a national service which replaced what used to be Trading Standards Advice Service, which was a bit sporadic depending on where you lived. Now it's a national service, and if there is dealing with matters which trading standards need to know about, it will be passed through to us. And certainly if you or anyone you know has been scammed, we will get back to you, or the person involved. And to report a scam with for the police, do so via Action Fraud 0300 123 2040. And as we said earlier, if you've lost money, do contact your bank. So I think, Natalie, are we sending these slides round later?
Not the slides themselves, but I will circulate obviously that information document we've got.
Of course,
basically
brilliant.
covers the links and
lovely.
as
So you'll
such,
get
it
that
covers-
information.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Natalie. So you'll get that information via an email. So congratulations, you're now a friend against scams. Woohoo! If anyone's interested, the Friend Against Scams initiative is something which was set up by the National Trading Standards Scams team. And if you've heard about Dementia Friends, it's very similar to that, in that there's a sort of tiering. So the first level is you can be a friend against scams, and we would ask that you talk to your friends, talk to people you work with about, you know, this presentation and scams, your personal experience, so that, as I say, we're not keeping it as a dirty secret. We're not letting the scammers win. We're talking about it to each other. So that's the first level. The next is that you can become a scam champion, which means that you can go within your own communities, your own clubs or workplaces, and you can disseminate the Friends Against Scams messages yourself. You'll be given all the materials in order to do that, if that's something that you fancy doing. And if so, do let Natalie or myself know, and we can advise you how to go about that. You can also...
Our next, oh, sorry, Linda.
Sorry,
I was just going to
ahead.
say our next Scam Champion training session or webinar is next Thursday, I believe. So I think you should all have my email from where I've emailed you the link. So yeah, just pop me a request if you do think you want to sign up to that, and I can book you on that.
Lovely, thank you. So any questions? Well, I finished 4 minutes early.
Right,
That
what I'm going to do, Linda, is I'm going to stop recording before we go on to the questions.
Yes.
So let me just... Oh, I'm going to stop recording.